to the Bars Ankle High. This is episode 63. I'm Katie.
I'm Garrett.
And this week we're continuing our discussion on the Pennhurst State School with where we left off, which was the commencement of the class action lawsuit called Halderman v. Pennhurst. And in that, we don't have any housekeeping, right? I don't think so.
I'm not the person to ask. My brain doesn't work, so.
I figured I'd just throw it out there in case.
I'm operating at like 5% capacity right now, so.
You're the alert on your phone where it's like, you need to get to a power outlet now.
Yes. And then when you do plug it in, it's like telling you that you're going to have diminished charging and you'll finish charging by 5 a.m.
Or that thing that's like, we'll start charging again when your phone returns to a normal temperature.
Yeah. I'm all of those things at the same time.
Cool.
Yeah, thriving. Still thriving.
It's like a Potpie of Ailments.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's pretty accurate. It's that, that meme of the guy and he's like, bro, I am straight up not having a good time. I literally sent that like 2 days ago to a friend of mine.
Fair.
Yeah.
So in this class action lawsuit, which was filed on behalf of former and current Pennhurst residents against the institution, the superintendents, and state officials responsible for the operation of the hospital, the plaintiffs argued that the institutionalization of the residents violated their constitutional rights under the First, 8th, 9th, and 14th Amendments. So, quick recap. The First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution protects the right to freedom of religion, freedom of expression from government, freedom of religion and freedom of expression from government interference. It prohibits any laws that establish a national religion, impede the free exercise of religion, abridge the freedom of speech, infringe upon the freedom of the press, or interfere with the right to peaceably assemble, or prohibits citizens from petitioning for a government redress of grievances. The 8th Amendment is the amendment that bars cruel and unusual punishment. The 9th Amendment is it's like the enumeration clause. So basically it's saying like, just because we didn't specifically say you have this right doesn't mean that you don't have this right. Basically saying like, it's like when you're fighting with your sibling and they're like, well, you didn't say not to touch your blah, blah, blah. Like,
I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you.
Yeah. The 9th Amendment is the thing that's like, yeah, that's fucking bullshit. No, like just because we didn't say you have the right to like not be harassed while you walk down the street doesn't mean that you don't have that right.
Right.
And the 14th Amendment is frequently referred to as the Equal Protection Clause. It passed after the U.S. Civil War. But it reads that no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive a person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So when people say, you're violating my due process rights, this is what they're talking about. They're talking about the 14th Amendment. Due process means that you have the right to be heard in court. It's what like most of our criminal law and the idea that you are entitled to a defense is based on. These days, I'm not a criminal attorney, so but yeah, the 14th Amendment is a big one. So anyway, the class action suit sought monetary damages and equitable relief. Equitable relief is basically like you stole my bike, so I'm going to sue you for the cost of replacing my bike, or you can give me my bike back. So it's a non-monetary relief. So in addition to the monetary damages, they sought equitable relief, which included closing Pennhurst, providing education, training, and care to the residents in community residential settings. So that was filed in 1974. It went to trial in 1977. where the U.S. District Court judge found, quote, Pennhurst was overcrowded, understaffed, and lacked the programs needed for adequate habilitation. I would have said habitation, but
I love when we have
habilitation.
those moments. We can put something so thoughtful together, and then we see this word, and we're like,
The judge also found various unwarranted forms of restraints, quote, were used as control measures in lieu of adequate staffing, including
and all the patients are like, yeah, duh.
Yeah, including seclusion rooms, physical restraints, and psychotropic drugs. The physical environment was found to be, quote, hazardous to the residents, both physically and psychologically, to the extent that it was, quote, not only not conducive to learning new skills, but is so poor that it contributes to losing skills already learned, unquote. Residents were found to have been subject to abuse by both other residents and staff. The judge ruled in the plaintiff's favor. In a wide-ranging opinion, he found the residents of Pennhurst had 3 distinct sets of constitutional rights. First, the right to habilitation, citing the Due Process Amendment, the right to be free from cruel and unusual punishment, and cases such as blah, 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 which included the Willowbrook case.
Oh, interesting.
The judge held that once admitted to a state facility, the residents have a constitutional right to be provided with minimally adequate habilitation under the least restrictive conditions consistent with the purpose of the commitment. The second constitutional right that Judge Broderick found was that the residents had the right to be free from harm, citing the 8th and 14th Amendments again, as well as cases such as Willowbrook. He held that the residents of Pennhurst had the constitutional right to be free from physical harm, which would mean that the hospital, Pennhurst, had an affirmative duty to protect residents from being harmed by other patients or by being harmed by other staff members. So when you neglect that duty, then you're liable for violation of these constitutional rights, as well as potentially like criminal charges. And the third constitutional right that Judge Broderick found the residents of Pennhurst had was the right to non-discriminatory habilitation. Judge Broderick extended the reasoning of the Pennsylvania ARC case, which is the one we talked about at the end of last episode. That was the one that said, where they sued the state saying that institutionalized children have the right to education. Judge Broderick said that the right to habilitation of the residents, the reasoning that allowed or permitted or required education of children with developmental disabilities in public education settings extended to the right of habilitation. He found that the confinement and isolation of, quote, the retarded in the institution called Pennhurst is segregation in a facility that is clearly separate and not equal, unquote.
Wow. Like the timing of this in relation to like civil rights too is it's just like it's just very interesting. Yeah, the timing of this, and it's interesting. I mean, we live in a very changeable time right now, but like this is another time period where things were like rapidly evolving. Like it's crazy that there had to be, this is like a federal court decision where they're like, hey, if someone's in your institution, you have to take care of them.
Right. Yeah. You have to not tie them to a fucking bed in a closed off room and leave them there.
It's just like, it's crazy. But also it's like you see how linked all of these different civil rights movements are together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you definitely can't have one without the other because they wind up using a lot of the same arguments and language. So they're all so intrinsically tied together.
Well, and that's, I think, I was never a huge fan of constitutional law just because it's such dense material. But I think something really beautiful about the Constitution is that it links all these different things together. It covers all of these aspects of our lives. It covers things from, the right to housing, to live with who you want to live with. Things like loving, like
Yeah.
US v. Loving or Texas v. Loving, whatever that case is. Like the idea that, sorority houses used to be illegal under the Constitution, and because it was more women and living in a home, because otherwise it was a brothel, and like all these different types of things.
And it makes me think about like when you have people that really rail against regulation. The reason that regulation and like so many of these laws exist is because you were trying to fuck with people constantly.
Yes. Right. And that's it's just, I shared something to my
So much for
Instagram
freedom.
stories. Right. Well, it's, I shared this to my Instagram stories on my personal Instagram, but there's some weird shell company bought like 50,000 acres of land next to like an Air Force base in California, and they don't know who owns the company. And I'm like, who the fuck signed the deed? like who signed these fucking
Also,
papers?
this is what you guys want.
Well, and that's
you
just
want
it. And I'm
companies to be
like,
able to do all this shit.
so
Guess what?
are we good with regulating corporations now? Because like this is fucking crazy. And I deal with it all the time. I mean, I work in the insurance world, and I deal with so many different companies that are all pointing to each other and are all like owned by so and so by so and so. And it'd be like you, me, Peaky, and your spouse, we all own 5 different companies together, but which 2 of us own each of those companies like varies. So
and
it's
even
like,
then, like I cover this for you and you cover this for me, and I take care of that for that one and that one, but not this one.
exactly. Like I'll do your payroll, you do my payroll, but I'm going to be on site directing that employee that you're paying, even though you're not their employer really.
And you have different like tiers of employees, so I'll cover this kind of employee, and somebody else can cover that employee. Yeah, it's
so like I see this kind of shit all the time, but it's that sort of thing where it's like, look, I understand that people don't want to pay taxes. I get it. However, if we could stop making corporations tax shelters for the rich, then perhaps they wouldn't be buying all this fucking land next to an Air Force base, to the point where like the Department of Homeland Security is like, we're worried about who just bought all this fucking land.
Yeah.
Like
that's cute.
Yeah,
that's
right.
cute that you're worried about that.
Right. So anyway,
guess what? I've been paying more taxes than that company
I know, right?
For my whole life.
Fucking taxes. I wouldn't mind if, we had single payer healthcare and universal paid family leave that was mandatory for all workers, regardless of where they work or who they work for.
Yeah, I mean, I have no problem paying taxes. My problem is I know that there are plenty of companies and billionaires that are not.
There it is. Yeah. I'll continue to pay my taxes. That's the thing.
It's not about equality. It's about equity. Like, what is fair?
Right.
Anyway,
yeah. So anyway,
well, it's not, but one of them.
He said that the segregation in Pennhurst is separate and not equal. He ruled that segregation of the residents of Pennhurst, quote, in an institution in which they have been and are being denied minimally adequate habilitation violated their equal protection rights as guaranteed by the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, unquote. The court then determined that each of these rights had been violated by the conditions at Pennhurst. The judge entered an order requiring Pennhurst to find, quote, suitable community living arrangements, unquote, for all of the residents of Pennhurst, quote, together with such community services as are necessary to provide them with minimally adequate habilitation, unquote. He also established a special master to oversee the appropriate placement of each resident and the eventual closure of Pennhurst. So that decision came out in 1977. So even though he ordered that Pennhurst had to be closed, that direction was ultimately modified on appeal and said that the most severe cases of extreme disability could remain at Pennhurst.
But again, they have to supply them with like minimally helpful.
Right. And there was like dozens of appeals coming out of this. The case continued to be litigated via appeals and various other court processes, quote, for the next few decades, according to one source I saw. While one appeal was pending in 1985, the parties entered into a settlement agreement that provided community living arrangements for the remaining residents of Pennhurst. Critical to this settlement was the systematic tracking and monitoring of progress made by former Pennhurst the progress that was made by former Pennhurst residents who had been placed in community living facilities under prior court orders. This tracking was done by Dr. Jim Conroy, who we will definitely be talking about next episode. But his research found, quote, former Pennhurst residents showed significantly faster development growth in the community than they had at Pennhurst. They received more services and more program time at less cost in public dollars. Prior to the transfer of the residents, over 60% of the families surveyed opposed the transfer. 6 months later, the same families overwhelmingly approved the decision, measured by a variety of standards. The families generally perceived the happiness of their relatives to be much greater in the community than it was at Pennhurst.
Wow.
So, yeah, like, I mean, and I think part of it, you know, whether they're, I saw something that was like, you know, during this transfer period or this transitional period, they, I don't know if it was Dr. Conroy or somebody else, but they were talking to the residents and they were like, okay, like they were kind of doing like art therapy, and they're like, draw a picture of like, if you could live anywhere and be anywhere, like draw a picture of what that would look like. And the residents were drawing pictures of them like going on a picnic in a field and getting married or having kids and living in a house. And one of the people who was like, over my dead body, will you be moving my child out of this institution, was like, looked at the pictures and was like, they just want the life that we have. Yeah. But I mean, I think that for a lot of, I think especially men, which is sexist, but for the time, I think men especially were really, really uncomfortable with the unknown. And similar to now, when we're going through a huge social shift, I think the old white guys are going to dig their heels in until you can prove concretely that it's the right choice.
Or until it impacts them.
Correct. So anyway, in June 1982, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on the case of Romeo v. Youngberg that the Constitution imparts a right to, quote, minimally adequate treatment, unquote, for people involuntarily committed to state institutions. The court defined the rights of such involuntarily committed persons to a right to be free from, quote, unreasonable bodily restraints and to a reasonably safe environment and whatever minimal training might be required to protect those interests, unquote. Romeo v. Youngberg was a case that was filed by the mother of an individual who had received several serious injuries after his commitment to Pennhurst. The defendants, which were several Pennhurst employees, had prevailed at trial, but the trial results were overturned by the Third Circuit Court, which is a federal appeals court, which then ordered a new trial to be held. And that case was then settled before another trial was scheduled. But it had gone up to the Supreme Court before the settlement happened. So while all that was happening, and because Pennhurst was able to stay open after 1977 because of those appeals that I mentioned, in 1982, as a result of reports of abuse by inmates, they called it inmates.
Patients.
As a result of reports of abuse by residents.
Although they were treated like inmates.
Right, and their families. Yeah. Pennsylvania State Trooper Joanne D'Agostino became an undercover aide at the institution. Wow.
I love this.
In November 1983, following a year-long investigation, the Department of Justice handed down indictments against 9 then current and former aides at Pennhurst.
The DOJ?
Mm-hmm. On charges of beating and abusing patients. This is the first time that a federal indictment, these are the first federal criminal civil rights prosecutions for abuse brought against employees of a mental institution.
That's wild.
Yeah.
And that was in the early 80s?
Mm-hmm. 1983. Damn. November 3rd, 1983 is when the indictment was released.
Handed down.
Yeah. The investigation that supported the charges was based on the work of the undercover police officer in part. According to the superintendent of Pennhurst, who was quoted by the New York Times at the time, said Pennhurst had dismissed all 9 employees, but that one had contested the action and regained her job. The superintendent continued, stating that the move to dismiss those people, quote, shows we were on top of these things, unquote.
does it though. It's that, are you sure about that?
Yeah, you sure about that, bud?
Are you sure about
Yeah, not the flex you think it is, my dude. Like, what the fuck?
Oh, God. You gotta love the audacity
Also,
of that response.
this is just people who were, so they fired 9 people in a year, at least, because of the abuse. So, like, yeah. There's also that. At the time of the indictments, Pennhurst was home to about 640 patients, with the average length of stay being more than 35 years.
35 years.
Mm-hmm. Oh, no, people, like, lived there.
Yeah, that's
like,
how it was with Willowbrook.
Yes, there
People
was
that
no...
were brought there as, like, little kids.
Yes.
And just left there.
Correct. Or as soon as they turn 18, then they're left there.
Yeah.
And that's it. So according to the Department of Justice, 90% of the patients at the time had IQs below 35. 10% were over 62 years old. 20% were blind or visually impaired. And 20% were confined to wheelchairs or had other mobility issues affecting their ability to walk. So the defendants were Debbie Balinsky of Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, who was 26, and was accused of causing one patient to beat and physically abuse another patient. Marcia Conrad of Schwenksville, Pennsylvania, was 27 and was accused of assaulting and injuring a patient. Gregory Derricks of Spring City, Pennsylvania, was 25 and was accused of 2 counts of physically abusing 2 patients. Hastings Dice of Schwenksville, PA, was 43 years old and was accused of 10 counts of beating 9 patients. He was later convicted of, he was later convicted of 7 counts, appealed, and that appeal was denied. The conviction was affirmed. Kevin Peace of Pottstown, PA, was 23 and was accused of 3 counts of beating 1 patient and slapping and physically abusing another. Cecil Snell Jr. of Pottstown, PA, was 22 and accused of 2 counts of beating and assaulting patients in wheelchairs. Margaret Wysanewski of Phoenixville, PA, was 52 years old and accused of assaulting a patient. And that's the one who was still employed by Pennhurst at the time of the indictment. And Harold Yost of Pottstown, PA, was 46 years old and accused of 2 counts of assaulting and beating patients. The max penalty for each violation was $1,000 and 1 year in jail per charge under 18 USC Section 242, if anybody cares. You can tell where I added stuff in because I thought you'd ask me a question.
That's what I do with my notes. Sometimes I'm like, nope, I don't know, Katie. I don't know why or how. Oh, God. That's funny.
So what really struck me is the age ranges of these people.
Yeah. I'm surprised how young some of them were.
Yes.
And you think about how many hundreds of employees in the past got away with shit that they did that was this bad or worse.
And it's also that thing of like, if you're young, I can almost understand why you would be so overwhelmed that you would resort to beating somebody. Not that I am excusing it in any way, shape, or form, but I can understand how you could get overwhelmed.
Especially when you have somebody in their 50s who's been there for how long doing the same thing or telling you how to handle things.
Which, happens with corrections officers and cops and shit.
Right.
So it's like the same kind of toxic work environment, basically.
Bad barrel.
So as a result of her testimony before the grand jury, the federal grand jury, in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, her being the undercover cop, Joanne D'Agostino, several Pennhurst employees were indicted, including Dice and Cecil Snell. Snell pleaded guilty and testified at Dice's trial for the government. So
this is such
on appeal,
a juicy case.
I know. Dice's appeal, he was appealing the conviction, saying like they didn't have enough proof, and basically the appellate court was like, no, they did.
Nice try.
Yeah, like, cause it was like basically this like technicality of like, because he was almost like trying to make it this like amorphous argument where like, well, civil rights can't really be defined. It's like,
body
you're beating people, like, dude. Anyway.
You're targeting people in wheelchairs.
I couldn't figure out what happened to the other accused people besides Dyson Snell.
Hopefully butthole spiders.
I don't like I was trying to like Google it really quickly, but like beyond paying for like a background check from like a shady website, I was I was like, it's just not that big of a deal.
There are limits to how far the bar's ankle high will go, and paying for background checks is on that list.
Yeah, it's not that important to me. It was like the kind of thing where I was like, maybe I'll just text Garrett for their New York Times login and like see if I can get into the archives, but not even anything else was coming up on Google. Because I found an archived New York Times article that was like digitized and fine. And then same thing with Washington Post and all that.
They probably became corrections officers after that. Like we found a different population to beat and abuse.
As I was saying, I was trying to figure out, what happened to the other defendants and people who were charged, and I just couldn't figure it out. I did see some sources say that they were convicted, but they weren't newspaper sources. And so I'm not sure that those sources knew the difference between an indictment and a conviction.
That's reasonable.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, in the U.S., an indictment is when a grand jury is presented with the state's evidence only and determines, based on that evidence, if there is enough proof that the accused did the crime. There's a lower standard of proof. Normally in criminal cases, the standard of proof is, quote, beyond a reasonable doubt. For grand jury, though, the standard of proof is preponderance of the evidence, which could like truly boil down to more likely than not. Theoretically, it could be a coin flip.
Right, because they're just saying like, yeah, this could be a case.
Right, and they're only looking at the prosecution's side of the argument.
Right.
The defendant is not permitted to. The defendant can be present, and their attorney can be present during the grand jury, usually, unless it's like a sealed thing. But the defendant is not allowed to testify. They're not allowed to present any evidence or any witnesses of their own.
Right.
So it's only after the grand jury issues an indictment that charges can be formally filed against a defendant. The standards for this, I believe, vary from state to state. I know for sure in New York that you must be indicted by a grand jury to be charged with a felony, but not a misdemeanor. And for our international listeners, I don't know if you guys have felonies. I'm sure there's some sort of differentiation. I just don't know what you guys call it. A misdemeanor is punishable by up to 1 year in jail for each count that you're charged with. A felony is punishable by at least 1 year and 1 day in prison. And that's pretty much how you can tell them apart.
What the UK calls what they consider a felony, because I feel like it's some kind of absurd name. Fiddlesticks or something. Ridiculous.
A jolly tickler.
Please don't write us hate mail. We think it's really funny.
It's just a felony.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, that's disappointing. I figured if they were still wearing their powdered wigs that there would be some kind of like really fucking funny name for it.
I prefer jolly tickler, but
yeah, me too. That's like when we found out that people from the UK call farts pumps. And we haven't stopped laughing about it since.
Call what pumps?
Farts.
That's ew. No, don't call it that.
I will never stop laughing about it. And we will sometimes use it like, it smells like pumps in here. It's very funny.
Why do they call it pumps?
I don't know.
So, like, is that song like all the other kids with the pumped up kicks?
Oh, they're probably like, ew.
They got farty shoes. Fart shoes by Fozzie Bear. Anyway, what a derailment.
I felt responsible for that one. Again, sorry. My bad.
But yeah, so a felony is a bigger deal, basically. A conviction means that after the defendant was charged with a crime, he or she either pled guilty to the charges or it went to trial, and then the judge or the jury found that they committed the crime beyond a reasonable doubt. So after that settlement agreement, though, of the class action lawsuit that happened in 1985, all patients were ultimately transferred to community living facilities, and some were eventually able to live independently. Many going on to hold jobs for the rest of their working lives.
Amazing.
So on
Not
December
amazing,
9th,
but like,
right?
Head shake.
Yes, exactly. On December 9th, 1987, one day before I was born, Pennhurst closed permanently.
The universe is like, these two things can't exist at the same time.
Basically. Pennhurst closed permanently. In the ensuing years, the Commonwealth has closed numerous other facilities for persons. Pennsylvania is a Commonwealth, by the way, if you don't know. It has something to do with their government and their constitution. I don't fucking.
It's
it
like
doesn't
Pennsylvania, Louisiana, and there's another one.
Virginia,
Massachusetts,
and Massachusetts, Virginia, and Massachusetts.
Trivia
also,
that no one needed.
Rhode Island is like a weird thing.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I
don't know what it is, but it's weird.
Yeah. Well, now I have to know. So until November 2020, the state of Rhode Island was officially named the State of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations until November 2020.
God damn, guys.
Yeah, they were really on top of it, huh?
A little slow on the uptake.
Also, for being like so in New England.
Yeah, so far north.
Yeah, there's no whatever.
It's not big enough for any plantations.
No. Anyway, the Commonwealth. So on December 9th, 1987, third try, Pennhurst closed permanently. In the ensuing years, the Commonwealth has closed numerous other facilities for persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities. In 2010, 5 state centers remain, serving fewer than 1,300 people. In 2002, NBC 10, as I mentioned last episode, NBC 10 revisited the report done by Bill Baldini 34 years earlier. And Bill Baldini went and caught up with some of Pennhurst's former residents, 2 of them whom got married to each other because they met at Pennhurst.
Oh, wow.
And they had a little apartment where they lived together and were just like the happiest little old couple you've ever seen. They were so cute.
That's so sweet.
After the closing of Pennhurst, the property, which had been registered as a historic landmark, like also in the 70s, and was put on the National Register of Historic Places.
Jesus Christ.
There's
gotta be another distinction we can give it.
I mean, truly, it was like, they're like, this building's old. I guess that means it's historic. And then they just never went inside the building.
Yeah. They were like, we're not going to Google it. We don't need to know what happened.
So it passed through a bunch of different hands. They carved it up. Parts of it, it's a veterans home, a veterans cemetery. There's an open space plan that included the Schuylkill River Park that I mentioned last time, where you can see the Monopoly Railroad tracks.
Yeah, I think Willowbrook has like a walking path now, and they have like they have like signs up that like tell people the history of like what happened. And...
Yeah, there's like one of those blue and yellow landmark signs that wasn't erected until like 2010 on the property, but it's there. And the Pennhurst Memorial Society and the Pennhurst Memorial and Preservation Alliance, which the second one runs that preservepennhurst.org website. They currently work to ensure that the stories of former residents of Pennhurst are not forgotten and that people continue to remember and fight for the rights and needs of disabled individuals from all walks of life. And they are also working to create a National Museum of Disability History.
They should put one of those in DC. Like they should do a Smithsonian.
Yeah. I think what they wanted to do was do it on the Pennhurst property, but yeah, in DC it would make more sense because there's all sorts of museums there. But yeah. And then there was like a lot of like yada yadaing with the transferring of ownership. And in 2010, Pennhurst, what was remaining of the original Pennhurst property was sold to private owners who worked with Randy Bates of the Bates Motel Halloween attraction to turn Pennhurst's lower campus into a commercial Halloween haunted attraction. Because as we'll find out next week, shit is super fucking haunted.
When
they do
was
like
that?
A haunted house? 2010. It opened in October 2010 and still is running. The
thank you.
Pennhurst Memorial and Preservation Alliance takes like real issue with it. They take issue with the haunted house part of it, because they think it's kind of like exploiting what happened to the patients there, which I agree with.
In poor taste.
There's like a bloody dentist.
Oh my God.
Yeah. It's like
Wow.
but yeah, I think, you know, there's a difference between doing a ghost hunt and potentially trying to help some spirits move on who may not realize they're dead.
Yeah, or like combining it with like a historical tour and being like,
which they also
this is what
do.
happened.
They do
Right.
those historical tours and they do those ghost tours, but yeah, the haunted house aspect of it that runs during
That's a
October. Yeah, I think it's just icky.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I get it, but it's the kind of thing where it's like, I don't know, like
That's in poor taste.
Yeah, like yeah. And I mean, Eastern State Penitentiary.
There's nothing we can joke about anymore.
Right. And nearby, Eastern State Penitentiary also does a haunted house through a former prison where people were tortured. So like it's very similar. I think the potential difference is that
they weren't doing that
for the most part. Well, they weren't doing it to children theoretically, but also for the most part, people at Pennhurst were not convicted of a crime. So it's the kind of thing where it's like, you know, it's yeah. I mean, but yeah, so next week we'll pick up with the ghosts of Pennhurst. So yes, it will come out after Halloween, but I didn't realize that this was going to take 2 episodes to get through the history when I told Garrett I wanted to do it. So.
Also, Halloween for me starts Labor Day weekend and extends until just about Thanksgiving. So
perfect. So we're following the Garrett calendar. It's similar to the Augustinian calendar, but just a little bit compressed and expanded in different regions.
Yes. Oh, Christmas is shorter. Halloween is much longer.
Don't you fucking dare take my Christmas from me.
I don't take Christmas. I just limit it to after Thanksgiving.
Okay, so from Thanksgiving then to like Valentine's Day. Got it.
Yeah, Thanksgiving to like New Year's Eve.
Valentine's Day.
Yeah. About that.
You want Labor Day to Thanksgiving for Halloween? I'm not taking that much time for Christmas.
It literally hits Labor Day weekend. I'm like, well, time to put them up. Time to put my ghosts up.
So in the meantime, check out preservepennhurst.org and see if you want to support them. And I believe they have a petition on their website to support the establishment of the National Museum of Disability History.
It's a great idea.
And so you can check that out. They also have, I got a bunch of my information from them, but they have like a scrolling timeline of all the different events and everything.
That's interesting.
It's just interesting to see. And I know I mentioned it last time, but they have that that page about Christmas in Purgatory and some of the photos from that, as well as they have a link to the video Suffer the Children, or Suffer the Little Children by Bill Baldini and NBC 10. So you can watch that whole like series in one go. But yeah, so check that out, and then we'll be back next week with the ghosts, which is it was a little creepy, I'll be honest. I got a little skeeved out a couple times, so there was some wild stuff, and PK doesn't believe in any of it, so
that's no fun.
I know, which is also wild because he loves scary movies. Like he loves Annabelle and like The Conjuring and shit. Right. And I was like,
wish I could watch them and then immediately erase them from my head.
Sophie too. No, I have no interest in scary ghost movies especially. But yeah, so I have to be careful when I even watch like these ghost hunter shows. But there are some wild things that they caught on camera. So yeah, we'll be here next week. In the meantime, you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook and Threads at The Bar is Ankle High. We have merch at bit.ly/anklehighmerch. You can leave us a 5-star review and share us with your friends and enemies and frenemies.
And ghosts.
And join our Patreon at patreon.com/thebarisAnkleHigh. Right now, our anklets and limbo champions are getting ad-free episodes while Garrett is on maternity leave. Normally, that's a privilege reserved or a benefit reserved just for our limbo champion subscribers. So now is for sure the time to sign up.
And even if you're even if you're not toe rings, but anklets and limbo champs, you normally get great Dysfunction Junction episodes.
Yeah, I mean, there is a back catalog of Dysfunction Junctions that are
that are really something else.
They run the gamut.
You want to learn about elephant sex toys? Or
the beef between the difference between Bob Barker and Hugh Hefner, or
you want to talk about Armie Hammer?
Oh yeah.
Or me holding a very freshly born piglet. Tune in.
Or the difference between Hugh Jackman and Gene Hackman.
Oh yeah, that was a fun one. That was fun. I was real proud of that concept. We have fun.
We did have fun, and we'll. I know we just had it now in July as the crow flies, but we'll be having more watch parties. Which the more people who attend them, the better. But we get on Discord and share our hot takes, and then once little Blueberry is inoculated, we'll be able to do that so that we're together at least, and we don't have to worry about timing shit and all that.
And the watch parties, I feel like coming up on this time of year when we've got Halloween and Christmas, it's the perfect time for watch parties.
For sure. Yeah. And somebody requested that we revisit old VH1 MTV dating shows and shit. And that kind of stuff. So maybe that's what we'll do. But yeah.
Or if you have a recommendation.
Yeah, if you have a recommendation, let us know. Send us an email, thebarisAnkleHigh@gmail.com, or reach out to us on Instagram. That's definitely the best way to help us keep track of what you think.
Don't say it to us verbally because we'll forget.
All right, we gotta end this episode before my cat murders me. We'll be here next week. In the meantime, check out preservepennhurst.org, and we will see you in a week. Bye.